All right, folks, we have surveyed the scene in sunny SoCal. We've observed the offensive overhaul at Oregon. Now it is time for us to witness the Washington Huskies as they try to follow up a national runner-up finish last season. And to help us preview the Huskies, we are thrilled to welcome on Andy Yamashita. He covers the Huskies for the Seattle Times. You can follow him on X at AN Yamashita. It is our pleasure to welcome him to Big Ten Country. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a lot of travel this week. I guess welcome to the rigors of being in a coast-to-coast conference. And hopefully you had some good coffee this morning, man.
Haven't had my coffee yet, y'all, but I'm happy to be here. And yeah, thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. The pleasure is all ours, man. We're so thrilled to have Washington in the Big Ten. And obviously, I mean, talk about a program that has undergone a lot of significant changes. Everybody's talking about Michael Penix being out of the picture, but I think it all starts at the top with Kalen DeBoer heading to Alabama, bringing in Jedd Fisch from Arizona. Just kind of curious to get your take, Andy, on what that vibe has been like, not only going into a new conference, but also doing so with a brand new head coach, especially with how close Washington came to taking down a national title last season.
Absolutely. I think Washington fans have really been on a roller coaster ride the last 6 months. And even you can look at it beyond just football, right? That they've had 3 athletic directors in the span of about, I think, a year. They've had going back to Peterson in 2019 when he retired all of a sudden. Then you had Lake come through and his tenure was about a year and a half. And then you had DeBoer for 2 years. And now we're here with Jedd Fisch. So it's been a pretty crazy, not just last 6 months for Washington fans, but kind of a crazy last 5 years. There hasn't been a lot of stability, especially when you consider this is a program that, like you said, played in the national championship game in January. Yeah. So it's definitely been a wild ride. I think Washington fans are a little bit shell-shocked in a way, trying to kind of get their heads wrapped around this new season. They lost a lot of players too, outside of, they won the Joe Moore Award last year for the best offensive line. All 5 of those guys are gone, 2 to the NFL, 2 transferred to Ole Miss, 1 transferred to Alabama. They lost a lot of guys from their defensive backfield who they thought they could rely on coming into this season. So it's a completely different roster, a completely new coaching staff, a new athletic department, just complete overhaul of everything at Washington. So they're kind of a big question mark. No one really knows what they're going to look like, how they're going to line up. A lot of these guys are, big potential players, but no one's really seen them play. There's a lot of expectation for a guy like Denzel Boston, who had a great spring game. He was the number 5 receiver on the depth chart last year off the top of my head. I didn't cover the team last year. I got the job in February, but I went to UW, so I know the team, I know the program, and for as good of a spring game as he had, he's also a sophomore who has 7 career catches, and that's who they're expecting to be one of their top 3 receivers this year. So it just kind of goes to show all of the question marks surrounding Washington as they, embark on something they haven't done since 1916. That's the last time Washington moved conferences. They were a charter member of the PCC. So it's going to be interesting for sure. And I think Washington fans are still, their heads might still be spinning a bit.
I got a 2 for 1 for all our fans here in the Big Ten. Let them know the physical traits of Boston. As you said, he hasn't had a lot of receptions, but comparable to the 3 receivers that left. But I want to get to the shell shock subject that you mentioned as far as the fan base, right? When you look at so much upheaval that has taken place, and you're going through Kalen DeBoer being 25-3 of the last 2 seasons, in the back of your mind, and you being an alum, there has to be a feeling, it's going to happen again. Because this man is so successful that someone's going to cherry pick him. Can you truly enjoy the success with there being fear that perhaps what's happened in the past, as far as our school perhaps being a stepping stone for a better job, and someone taking away someone who's done so well for us and perhaps been the best head coach of this program?
Yeah, I think Kalen DeBoer was on local radio here 2 or 3 days ago, I want to say, and one of the things that one of the radio hosts kind of addressed was that every great coach at Washington will always be compared to Don James, right? And Don James turned down Ohio State, because he said everything you could need was at Washington. And I think that right now, that's just not where Washington is as an athletic department right now. I think that there are legitimate fears that, Jedd Fisch hasn't held a job for more than 4 years anywhere he's been. And he has a 7-year contract. He talked about that stuff with us at Media Day. We asked him about, he signed this big contract and now all of a sudden the athletic director who gave it to him isn't here anymore. And we talked to him about how he's developing a relationship with new athletic director, Pat Chun. And he said stuff like that, I have a big contract here. I expect to be here for a long time. But, if you're a Washington fan, having just witnessed Kalen DeBoer say those same things, I think there's certainly some worry, right? Fisch is a Florida guy. Billy Napier looks like he has a real tough start to the season after already maybe being on the hot seat. There's certainly questions there. I think if you're a Washington fan, you just have to enjoy the season however it turns out, because it's so hard now in the modern landscape of college football where people leave after 2-3 years. Opportunities have to be taken when they're on the table. That I don't know. I think that if you just try and enjoy the season, and who knows how good or bad they'll be this season, I think that that's kind of the approach Washington fans have to take until they can, again, establish themselves in a conference, establish themselves really as a place that, people want to go and see as a legitimate place where you can build something long-term. But, again, even long-term, how many coaches in college football now stay longer than 5 years, right? That just might be the environment now. So I think that's all like a part of it.
I think what was so fascinating to me was one of with all of the upheaval that this program saw, you saw Will Rogers come in as a transfer. There was a lot of excitement about him replacing Michael Penix Jr. There was talk of him leaving after DeBoer left. He went back into the transfer portal, but he did end up sticking around. And I thought that was maybe the first sign that there's like slow momentum kind of building toward establishing Washington as a place that guys not only go to, but also stay at. How important was it to this Washington program amid all of this other transition to at least keep that locked down, to be able to have him as their signal caller going into the 2024 season?
Yeah, I definitely think that was important. He was originally brought in under DeBoer, like you said, because DeBoer had a big 4-star kid from Folsom, I think, named Austin Mack, who was supposed to be the long-term successor to Penix, but he reclassified, enrolled early as like a 17-year-old last year. So that was his true freshman year. So he was going to be like an 18-year-old redshirt freshman this year. So they were like, let's get one guy in who has 1 year eligibility, who we can trust to throw the ball around. And then, as a third-year sophomore, Austin Mack will be ready to like take over the program. And then obviously DeBoer leaves. Mack follows him to Alabama. And if you're Washington, you're like, well, who's going to play quarterback for us now? Like you said, Rogers went back in the portal. Jedd Fisch comes, isn't able to bring Noah Fafita from Arizona, but he does get Damon Williams. And Damon Williams is a quarterback that the staff is clearly very high on. They were very high on him throughout spring. He had kind of a rough spring game, but again, he's enrolled early as a freshman. So he's, not even had his first full year of college yet. And I think having, a veteran presence like Rogers, a guy who's done it a lot, at a high level at Mississippi State, he had a difficult season last year, partially because Mississippi State had such a difficult season, coaching changes, obviously the passing of Mike Leach impacting that program. But, he talked about the importance of Will Rogers coming back during Media Day, if Jedd Fisch did. And he was saying that he really went to Rogers and said, look, like, this is a chance for you to show you can do something else outside of run an air raid. He said, We throw the ball a lot, but we don't throw it like the air raid. We're going to stretch the field more vertically. We're not going to ask you to throw the ball 60 times a game. This is an opportunity for you in an offense that we think you'll have some real good chances to show people what you can do outside of what everyone already knows you can do after 4 years. So I think that it's important for Washington. It gives them a good veteran leadership. You hear everyone talk up just how much of a leader he's been in that program that, again, lost so many of its older guys, whether it's to the NFL or the transfer portal. So it's definitely, going to be a bit of a luxury for them to at least have some experience under center at, a position where you probably need it more than any other position.
Kalen DeBoer and his staff were such excellent judges of talent, I meant to say. What other players that are still remaining on that roster do you expect to take another step and to kind of become the guys that we're talking about in the Big Ten moving forward?
Man, it's kind of hard to say. And it's funny, for DeBoer's strengths as a coach, absolutely. His recruiting classes weren't particularly highly ranked. And you can talk about, how much like ratings matter and everything like that. Like that's totally valid. But I think it'll be interesting. Boston is definitely one of those guys. He's a bigger receiver, bigger than any of the three guys who they just lost. If he can kind of find something there, I think that'll be important for them. I'm trying to think who else off the top of my head, but a lot of it is really unproven talent. Like so much of the guys who helped them make that run last year were older guys, 6-year guys, right? Like Edifon Ulofoshio was a 6-year guy, and all these guys had so much experience and were getting so many snaps that a lot of these younger guys who DeBoer recruited didn't see a lot of time. I'm trying to think, like a lot of I think guys who will stand out will probably be more the Arizona guys who followed Fish from down south, Yeah. Adela Coleman, and Isaiah Ward on the edge. They got that kid, Jordan Washington, who was a really big recruiting win for Fish in Arizona. He now transfers to Washington. Wasn't here for spring ball, but he'll be here again. And he's kind of the only, speed back, I guess, that they have. A lot of the running backs that Fish and his staff seem to prefer are the bigger kind of power backs, but Washington might add something different. So really, like Boston's like kind of the main one. And then there's just a bunch of kind of unproven guys with a lot of questions who are less proven than Boston. Yeah, it'll be interesting for sure. A lot of freshmen who have not played a single snap.
I was going to say, like, you want to talk about an area where you have, so much unproven talent and so much talent that's going to have to kind of gel together is going to be on that offensive line. And that doesn't make life any easier when you're trying to replace the kind of receiver firepower that this team has lost, bringing in a completely new quarterback. I mean, if of all of the places on the offense where you have questions, that offensive line, you kind of look at that and you say to yourself, man, they've got a long road ahead of them. And you mentioned, an award-winning unit last season, going to be comprised of all new faces in 2024. It's going to be talk about a shock of shocks. To me, that's going to be the biggest thing, is whether or not they'll be able to keep Will Rogers upright or to get their run game going.
Absolutely. And I think that's generally everyone's worry with Washington going into the season. Again, you lose all 5 starters. You bring in, some guys from the portal, which we've already seen at other places is a challenge. What's the one place you don't want? You want some continuity. It's on the offensive line. I think Brendan Carroll had a good year at Arizona, but they weren't able to bring any O-linemen with him from that group. So it's going to be a work in progress for sure. And, they only had 7 healthy O-linemen during spring practice, or 7 scholarship linemen, and 2 of them were injured, actually. It was 5 bodies, basically.
Yep.
And so, we talked to Fish about that again at media day. He was optimistic. He said, that Landon Hatchett and Guard Memlar, who were the 2 who were injured, who he's hoping to rely on for a lot of snaps this year, are getting closer to coming back, but they're both coming back, I believe, from knee injuries. So there's, questions about how that'll happen, how quickly they'll be able to get back up to speed. DeBoer had a San Diego State transfer coming in named Drew Azzopardi, who they're going to need to be pretty good. He's, again, one of the most experienced guys in that group, and he has, I think, like 6 starts in the Mountain West. Yeah. So he'll be one, played a lot of both tackle spots during spring. Then they got a couple transfers. D'Angelo Titiali, who's actually a local guy, went to Eastside Catholic out here. Then he went and had played 4 years at Portland State, was pretty solid there. He might give them options at center or at guard. Inak Vimahi, who was a highly touted kid who couldn't quite make it work at Ohio State. They bring him in, hope that his experience and, his Big Ten experience might help out a little bit. And then they've got a bunch of, again, redshirt freshmen and true freshmen who are, unproven. They have a 4-star kid named Paki Finau who went in the portal, and they were really happy to keep him after Fish was hired. He was at spring ball, looked pretty solid, got a lot of reps at guard. So we'll see. They're up to 14 scholarship O-linemen for the season, which is a marked improvement over where they were 3 months ago.
Yeah, no doubt.
All that stuff that you need to have a great O-line, the chemistry, the time, the repetitions, they're not going to have a lot of that. So definitely it could be a case that it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback for Washington because they don't have any time to actually look downfield, but we'll see what happens.
Andy, being a UW alum, what are your feelings and thoughts on the demise of the Pac-12 and UW entering the Big Ten? And what does a successful inaugural season in the Big Ten look like for you, for UW?
Absolutely. And obviously, covering the team now, I'm impartial. Like I always tell people, it doesn't matter if Washington wins or loses. Like I still have to write a story today, so that's my day. But again, I'm from the West Coast. I grew up in El Cerrito, California, which is right near Berkeley. When I was a high schooler, we used to drive down to Memorial Stadium at Cal, and the only divider is a 2-story chain link fence is the only thing that'll stop you from getting in the stadium. So we'd hop over the fence, run down on the field, pretend like we were playing, stuff like that. And so because of that, I grew up, watching Pac-12 football, and I always felt like it was an underrated product. I loved the competitiveness of it, even if, they weren't out there winning national championships. I thought it was a great product. I love, the tradition that comes out here. I think that a lot of the West Coast schools get a bad rap for not caring, I guess, or not having a fan base, when I think that, time and a good team is all that is needed at some of these places to kind of reinvigorate their fans. But yeah, it's tough. I also understand why the moves that happened did. A lot of this stuff is driven by money, which fans will be unhappy about. But, with the way that athletic department budgets are built and the reliance on media rights, money, I don't know how tenable the streaming service was, right? Like, I think it was like 25 million, but it could be anywhere up to 50 million, depending on how subscribers worked out. But also, if you're an athletic director, if you're a CFO of an athletic department, you want like stability. Like I want to know exactly how much I'm getting every single year so that I can plan around that. So, the half share that Washington is going to get in the Big Ten, they're projecting to be about $5 million more than they collected over the average of the last 6 years in the Pac-12. Like, I don't know how you say no to that, right? Like, even at a half share, they'll be getting more than they were getting before. So all that stuff, I think I understand why it happened and everything like that. I think it'll be interesting because I don't know how much the rest of the country understands about West Coast football or the West Coast. I think, again, the whole Pac-12 after dark thing meant that a lot of people on the East Coast weren't watching these great games and these great teams play. I think people will be surprised by Washington. I think it's one of the only schools in a major city that has the support that it does. I was explaining this to someone else at Media Day the other day, but, Seattle has a lot of pro sports teams, but because there aren't a lot of other pro sports teams in the area, they have a big area to draw from, right? Like, there are like people in Portland are Seahawks fans, people in Eastern Washington are Seahawks fans, people in Idaho are Seahawks fans, like people in Montana might be Seahawks fans. And same goes for, some of the other pro sports here. There's no other baseball team to compete with the Mariners. There's no other women's basketball team to compete with the Storm. The Blazers down in Portland don't have anyone to compete with them. But UW football has very deep, deep ties to Seattle. The state is very divided. There's a mountain range, the Cascades, that goes right through the middle of the state. The eastern half of the state are all Cougs fans or Gonzaga fans. Everyone in Oregon is an Oregon or an Oregon State fan. And, it's funny because those fan bases will argue, all day on Saturday, and then they all show up at Lumen Field in their Seahawks jerseys on Sunday.
Yep.
It's funny, but, because of that, though, Washington is really Western Washington's team. And I think that because of that, there's a deep love for the Huskies. The Huskies were great before any of the teams. The Seahawks didn't win a Super Bowl until 2011. No one knows if the Mariners will ever even make the playoffs again. So, the Huskies have 2 national championships, have always been a really good Pac-12 team. I think 17 or 18 conference championships. So Washington gave people in Seattle something to uplift them while they were watching their other sports teams be bad. So I think there's a deep connection here to the team that maybe people outside of Washington, outside the Pacific Northwest, maybe don't know. I think it's easy for college sports teams to get lost in the shuffle of pro sports. So I think it's kind of a unique environment here. As for a successful season in the Big Ten, to me, honestly, with all the turnover, I think 6-6 in a bowl game would be a great season for Washington.
Wow.
I think Washington fans won't like that, but I think that's realistic. I think if you get to 6-6, anything on top of that is like cake, and is just just even better. But yeah, I think it'll be an interesting transition to the Big Ten, and I'm gonna miss the Pac-12 personally. But again, it's a sign of the changing times, and this is the new world of college football that we live in. This is how athletes can get some compensation for all the work that they put in. This is how, the schools that are serious about football can kind of, set that bar and put together something that's different. But again, as much as I love the tradition and pageantry of college football, the other constant in college football is change, right? Mm-hmm. Conferences realign every 20 years. There's a new CFB format or your championship format every 5 years. This is just how it is, and this is all part of it. So I think it'll be interesting whatever happens in the Big Ten.
You're going to have a lot of interesting road trips coming up this season. You get to go to scenic New Jersey to go to a Rutgers game. You get to go the second half of the schedule for the Huskies, real rough. You got road trips to Iowa, Penn State, and Oregon. So good luck with those journeys. And then, of course, you got the rematch of the national title game in Seattle against Michigan in October. That one's going to be awesome, too.
I was going to say, man, I just wish that somehow I think UCLA and USC both come to Seattle. Give me one of the LA trips. That's all I was asking. If you're gonna send me to Rutgers, if you're gonna send me to Penn State, LA trips. But
it's certainly a far cry from going to Salt Lake City and Phoenix. It is a whole new world for the Huskies this season, and we're really looking forward to not only seeing them play, but also to see your work covering the team. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today on Big Ten Country. Welcome to the conference, and we'll certainly check in again later on down the road, maybe even Apple Cup week. We'll have to see whether or not that ends up working out. I know Ken has got his eyes on Wisconsin, Alabama that week, so we will see. We'll see what we got going on here in Big Ten Country. But again, thank you so much for joining us, bud.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate y'all having me. Hope we can do this again.
Congrats, you finished the video. If you want to build on that success, download the NBC Sports Chicago app. It's got highlights, exclusive insights, and push alerts tailored to you. Everything you need to be a real Chicago sports fan. Download it now.